The idea seemed absolutely insane when Roger Waters first proposed it to his management team in early 1990. He wanted to perform his epic rock opera, The Wall, not in a comfortable concert hall or massive stadium, but in the actual ruins of the Berlin Wall, among the rubble and devastation left behind by decades of division and conflict. The location wasn't just symbolic, it was still an active area of political tension and reconstruction, where the echoes of war and suffering lingered in every broken brick and shattered window. For Waters, who had spent years crafting The Wall as an allegory about isolation, conflict, and the barriers that divide people, the opportunity to perform it in the place where one of history's most famous walls had recently fallen seemed like artistic destiny. But nothing could have prepared him for the psychological and emotional impact that performing in this war-scarred landscape would have on his life and music for decades to come. The Berlin Wall had fallen just months earlier, in November 1989, leaving behind a cityscape that looked more like a battlefield than a modern European capital. The area around Potsdamer Platz, where Waters planned to stage his concert, was a wasteland of demolished buildings, crater-filled streets, and the skeletal remains of structures that had been damaged by decades of neglect and recent demolition. It was here, among the physical and emotional wreckage of the Cold War, that Waters would attempt to create something beautiful and meaningful from the ashes of human suffering. The logistical challenges of staging a major rock concert in such a location were staggering and unprecedented in the history of live music. There was no existing infrastructure for power, sound, or security in what was essentially a construction zone and historical disaster area. The ground was unstable, filled with debris and potentially dangerous materials from the demolished wall and surrounding buildings. But Waters was determined to make this impossible vision a reality, driven by a belief that art could heal wounds and bring people together in ways that politics and diplomacy had failed to achieve. As construction began on the massive stage and sound system required for the performance, Waters found himself spending more and more time in the ruins of Berlin, walking among the rubble and talking to local residents who had lived through decades of division. Their stories began to affect him profoundly, revealing the human cost of conflict in ways that his comfortable life as a rock star had never exposed him to before. He met elderly Germans who had been separated from family members for decades by the wall, children who had grown up knowing only a divided city, and former soldiers who had spent years guarding the border with orders to shoot anyone who tried to cross. Each conversation added another layer to his understanding of what war and division really meant for ordinary people, and each story made him question whether his artistic interpretation of these themes had captured their true horror and complexity. The most profound impact came from his interactions with survivors of World War II who were still living in Berlin and had witnessed the city's complete transformation over 5 decades. These elderly residents had witnessed the city's destruction during the war, its division during the Cold War, and now its reunification. They shared stories of unimaginable suffering, loss, and resilience that went far beyond anything Waters had imagined when he wrote The Wall as a concept album about his father's death in World War II. One particular encounter changed everything for Waters and would haunt his music for years to come. An elderly woman named Margaretha, who had lived through the bombing of Berlin as a child, took Waters to see the basement where her family had hidden during air raids. The space was still there, beneath a building that had been partially destroyed and rebuilt multiple times over the decades. As she described the terror of those nights, the uncertainty of whether they would survive until morning, and the grief of losing friends and neighbors, Waters realized that his understanding of war had been purely intellectual and artistic, rather than visceral and real. Standing in that basement, surrounded by the physical remnants of human suffering and listening to first-hand accounts of terror and loss, Waters experienced what he would later describe as a complete breakdown of his artistic ego. Everything he had thought he knew about conflict, loss, and human nature suddenly seemed shallow and inadequate. The comfortable distance between his art and reality collapsed, leaving him emotionally raw and psychologically vulnerable in ways he had never experienced before. This psychological shift became even more intense as the date of the concert approached, and the magnitude of what he was attempting became clear. The massive production required hundreds of workers, and many of them were locals who had their own deep personal connections to the site and its tragic history. Waters found himself unable to maintain the professional distance that usually existed between a performer and his crew. Instead, he became deeply involved in their personal stories and increasingly aware of the weight of performing in a place that held such profound meaning for so many people. The rehearsals themselves became emotionally challenging experiences. As Waters and his band ran through the songs in the ruins of Berlin, surrounded by the evidence of real conflict and real suffering, the lyrics took on new meanings that often left him unable to continue. Songs that had been comfortable metaphors in concert halls became almost unbearably real when performed in a location where people had actually lived through the experiences being described. The night of the concert, July 21, 1990, brought together an audience unlike any other in rock history. The crowd included former East and West German citizens attending their first shared cultural event in decades, international visitors who had come to witness this historic performance, and dignitaries from around the world who recognized the political and cultural significance of the moment. But for Waters, the most important audience members were the Berlin residents who had lived through the division and were now witnessing its artistic commemoration. As Waters took the stage and began the opening psalms of The Wall, he found himself overwhelmed by the weight of the moment and the responsibility he felt toward the audience. The theatrical elements of the performance, which had always been powerful metaphors in traditional concert settings, took on an almost unbearable reality in this location. When he sang about building walls between people, he was surrounded by the literal remains of one of history's most infamous barriers. When he performed songs about war and loss, he was standing on ground where real battles had been fought and real people had died. The emotional climax came during the performance of Comfortably Numb, when Waters looked out over the audience and saw faces that reflected decades of actual numbness. People who had learned to survive by shutting down their emotions in the face of overwhelming circumstances. The irony of performing a song about emotional detachment for an audience that had been forced to develop such detachment as a survival mechanism was almost too much for him to bear. But it was during the performance of The Trial that Waters experienced his most profound psychological breakdown. As the song built to its climactic conclusion, with its themes of judgment and condemnation, he became acutely aware that he was performing for people who had lived under real trials, real judgments, and real condemnations that had shaped their entire lives. The theatrical nature of his performance seemed suddenly trivial compared to the genuine human drama that had played out in this location over decades of suffering. The concert's finale, featuring the demolition of the wall that had been constructed as part of the theatrical production, was intended to be a triumphant celebration of freedom and unity. But for Waters, watching the carefully choreographed destruction while surrounded by the genuine ruins of division and conflict, the moment became a meditation on the difference between symbolic victory and real human healing. After the concert ended and the audience dispersed, Waters remained on the stage for hours, unable to leave the site where he had experienced such a profound psychological and artistic transformation. The performance had been a technical and commercial success, but it had also shattered his comfortable relationship with his own art and forced him to confront the limitations of artistic expression in the face of genuine human suffering. The impact on his subsequent music was immediate and dramatic. The albums he created in the years following the Berlin concert showed a marked shift toward more direct political commentary and less abstract artistic metaphor. His lyrics became more specific in their references to real conflicts and real people, and his musical arrangements incorporated elements inspired by the folk traditions of the regions where he had witnessed suffering firsthand. More importantly, the experience fundamentally changed Waters' understanding of his role as an artist and his responsibility to the world. He began to see himself not just as an entertainer or even as a commentator on social issues, but as someone with a responsibility to use his platform to address real injustice and real suffering in the world. This shift would influence not only his music, but his political activism and his relationships with other artists and causes. The psychological effects of the Berlin performance continued to manifest in Waters' personal life and creative output for years afterward. Friends and colleagues noted that he became more serious and introspective, less interested in the glamorous aspects of rock stardom, and more focused on the substance and meaning of his work. He began seeking out opportunities to perform in other locations with historical significance, always looking for ways to connect his art with the real experiences of people who had lived through conflict and suffering. The concert also had a profound impact on how other artists approached political and social commentary in their work, fundamentally changing the relationship between popular music and historical consciousness. The Berlin performance became a model for how music could engage with serious historical and political themes without losing its artistic integrity or emotional power. Many musicians who attended the concert or saw footage of it later cited it as a transformative influence on their own approach to politically conscious art and their understanding of the artist's responsibility to society. Critics and music historians now recognize the Berlin concert as a turning point not just in Waters' career, but in the broader relationship between popular music and political commentary throughout the industry. The performance demonstrated that rock music could serve as more than entertainment, that it could provide a meaningful forum for processing collective trauma and working toward healing and understanding in ways that traditional media and political discourse often failed to achieve. The impact extended far beyond the music industry into academic and cultural institutions around the world. Universities began incorporating footage and analysis of the Berlin concert into their curricula on conflict resolution, art therapy, and the role of culture in post-conflict healing. The performance became a case study in how artistic expression could serve as a bridge between different communities and help process traumatic historical experiences. The technical and logistical challenges overcome during the Berlin concert also set new standards for large-scale outdoor performances in challenging environments. The innovations developed for staging the show in the ruins became templates for future concerts in historically significant locations. And the success of the event encouraged other artists to attempt similarly ambitious projects that combined entertainment with historical commemoration. For Waters personally, the experience continued to shape his creative output and personal philosophy for decades after the initial performance. His subsequent albums consistently returned to themes of war, suffering, and redemption, but with a depth and authenticity that could only have come from direct confrontation with the realities he was describing. The abstract metaphors of his earlier work were replaced by specific references to real conflicts and real people, making his music more politically engaged and emotionally immediate. The Berlin concert also changed Waters' approach to live performance fundamentally and permanently. He began incorporating visual elements and staging concepts that directly referenced historical events and locations, always seeking to create connections between his artistic vision and the real experiences of his audiences. His tours became more than entertainment events. They became cultural experiences designed to educate and inspire, as well as entertain. The psychological transformation Waters experienced in Berlin also had unexpected effects on his personal relationships and family life. Friends and family members reported that he became more emotionally available and less focused on celebrity lifestyle. The confrontation with genuine human suffering had stripped away much of the artificial distance that fame often creates between artists and authentic human connection. His changed perspective influenced his approach to parenting, as he became focused on teaching social responsibility and using privileges to help others. The lessons about artistic interpretation versus lived reality became central to how he raised his family and conducted personal relationships. The ripple effects of Waters' transformation influenced younger artists who saw footage of the concert. Music schools began incorporating the Berlin performance as an example of how artists could engage meaningfully with political issues without sacrificing artistic integrity. The concert influenced international cultural diplomacy efforts, as governments recognized the power of artistic events to facilitate healing. The Berlin model became a template for similar events in post-conflict regions. Waters' experience contributed to academic research into psychological effects of performing in traumatic locations. Researchers studying trauma and healing began incorporating artistic performance into their understanding of community recovery processes. The documentation of Waters' personal transformation during and after the Berlin concert provided valuable insights into how direct confrontation with historical reality could fundamentally alter an artist's creative output and worldview. This research has informed approaches to art therapy and cultural healing that continue to be used in post-conflict regions around the world. The international attention generated by the Berlin concert also helped establish new funding models for culturally significant artistic events that served purposes beyond pure entertainment. Organizations dedicated to peace and reconciliation began supporting similar performances as part of their broader missions to promote understanding and healing between divided communities. The lasting impact of the Berlin concert on Waters' creative evolution can still be seen in his most recent work, which continues to grapple with themes of conflict, suffering, and the possibility of redemption through human connection. The authenticity and emotional depth he gained from that transformative experience in the ruins of Berlin continues to inform his artistic choices and political activism more than 3 decades later. The legacy of that night continues to influence Waters' work today, more than 3 decades after the original performance. In interviews, he often returns to the lessons he learned in Berlin about the difference between artistic interpretation of suffering and direct confrontation with its reality. He credits the experience with teaching him humility about the limits of art, while also reinforcing his belief in music's power to bring people together and help them process difficult emotions and experiences. For the people of Berlin who attended the concert, the performance became an integral part of their city's cultural history and their personal journey from division to unity. Many still speak of the event as a crucial moment in their psychological transition from a divided to a united city, an artistic ceremony that helped them process the enormity of the changes they were experiencing and provided a sense of closure to decades of separation and conflict. The concert also had lasting effects on the physical space where it was performed. The site at Potsdamer Platz has been completely transformed in the decades since, now home to modern buildings, shopping centers, and bustling commercial activity. But plaques and memorials commemorate both the historical significance of the location and the cultural importance of Waters' performance, ensuring that future generations will understand the connection between art and healing that was demonstrated that night. International media coverage of the concert helped establish a new model for how artists could engage with political and historical themes in their work. The extensive documentation of both the performance and its emotional impact on Waters and the audience, provided a template for other musicians seeking to address serious subjects in their art, while maintaining their credibility as entertainers. The concert's influence extended into other art forms as well, inspiring filmmakers, writers, and visual artists to explore similar themes of healing and reconciliation through their work. The idea that art could serve as a bridge between divided communities and help process collective trauma became a driving force in contemporary cultural production across multiple disciplines. Educational institutions around the world began using the Berlin Concert as a teaching tool for courses on conflict resolution, cultural diplomacy, and the role of art in society. The performance provided a concrete example of how creative expression could contribute to healing and understanding in ways that traditional political and diplomatic approaches often failed to achieve. The business aspects of the concert also set new precedents for how large-scale cultural events could be financed and produced. The complex logistics of staging a major performance in a historically significant location required new models of cooperation between artists, governments, and international organizations. These innovations influenced how subsequent cultural events were planned and funded, particularly those with political or historical significance. Waters' transformation following the Berlin concert also influenced his mentorship of younger artists and his involvement in various humanitarian causes. He became more active in supporting musicians from conflict zones and using his platform to draw attention to ongoing wars and human rights abuses around the world. The authenticity he gained from his Berlin experience gave him credibility when speaking about these issues that he had never possessed before. The concert's documentation and preservation also established new standards for recording and archiving significant cultural events. The extensive video and audio recordings of the performance, combined with interviews with participants and audience members, created a comprehensive historical record that continues to serve researchers and educators studying the relationship between art and healing. Today, the site where Waters performed The Wall has been transformed again, now home to modern buildings and bustling commercial activity that reflects Berlin's evolution from a divided city to a unified European capital. But the impact of that night in 1990, when a rock star confronted the reality behind his artistic metaphors and emerged fundamentally changed, continues to reverberate through the music world and beyond. The Berlin concert stands as perhaps the most powerful example in popular music history of how direct confrontation with human suffering can transform an artist's work and worldview. Waters' willingness to put himself in a position where his comfortable artistic assumptions would be challenged by reality created not only a memorable performance, but a template for how art can serve purposes beyond entertainment. If this incredible story of artistic confrontation with reality, personal transformation, and the power of music to heal historical wounds inspired you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with anyone who believes in the power of art to address real human suffering. Have you ever had an experience that completely changed your perspective on your work or life? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing stories about the moments when art and reality collide.